Hey everyone, happy Thursday. My name is Alex Volkov. I'm an AI evangelist with Weights and Biases, and this is ThursdAI. We had such a great show today. Over 1,100 of you tuned in to the live recording, which is incredible. I also wanted to say that if you're not subscribed to ThursdAI.news newsletter, please go ahead and do it, because I send a full blog with the links to the show notes and to the speakers that we have on stage, and you should be able to follow up. There's a bunch of multimedia, like videos that are not coming through in the audio-only podcast format. So please subscribe to ThursdAI.news as well. This live recording, we also hosted Maxime Lebon, who's a senior machine learning scientist with JP Morgan and the author of several models and merged models. Lately, the neural beagle model that we've talked about. We had a great conversation with Maxime, and that full episode will be posted as a Sunday special evergreen content episode. So please stay tuned for that. It's been an incredibly illuminating conversation in the world of merging and MergeKit and everything else that Maxime does. And it was a super cool conversation. So that's coming soon. And as I've been doing recently, the following is going to be a 7-minute segment from the end of the live recording, summarizing everything we've talked about. I hope you've been enjoying these TLDR intros. Please let me know in the comments if this is something that's helpful to you. Right. We're talking today, ThursdAI, January 18th. We're talking about Nous Hermes, the Mixtral fine-tune that came out from Technium and the folks at Nous. It was the first fine-tune of Mixtral, the mixture of experts model from Mistral that came from the Nous research folks, and it released in two versions, the DPO only version, SFT plus DPO version, given different data sets that it was trained on and actually different capabilities. It looks, based on the community, the DPO version is like very well performing. I've been running this on my MacBook with LM Studio, and it really performs well. So shout out, and folks should try this. This is by far the best, looks like the best Nous Hermes model based on just benchmarks that trained on the best open source model that's currently Mixtral. Mixtral is number 7th in the world based on LMSys Arena, and that's an open source model that we'll get to use. Then we've covered the Neural Beagle 14.7b from Maxime Lebon. Maxime also joined us for a full interview that you can hear as part of the a podcast episode, and Maxime released a Neural Beagle, which is a merge plus a DPO fine-tune, and it's one of the top performing 7 billion parameters on the Open LLM Leaderboard when released. And a few days ago, now it's 4th, so the speed with which things change is quite incredible. We then covered the LMSys SGLang attempt, as a 5x performance inference, bunch of techniques together on the front end and the back end, called radix attention on the back end, and the SGLang way to run through inference code on the front end that combines into almost a 5x performance on inference. 5x is incredible. Nistan mentioned that it does less than 5x on like longer sequences, and then we had a conversation about where it could improve significantly, which is agents, and agents are sending short sequences. Alignment Labs told us that this could be significant improvement in that area. So our agents are about to run way faster. A 5x improvement is just incredible. And we also mentioned that at the same day when this was released, another optimization was shouted out by Tim Dietmers from the QLoRa fame, called Marlin, that also improves by 4x some significant inference techniques. And I wonder if those can be compiled together in some way, but quite impressive. We also covered neural magic, doing sparsification and sparse, and we did in a deep dive into a short deep dive. Thank you, Alignment, and thank you, Austin, for what sparsification means. And they doing this for like major models, and they compress them with sparsification on like 50% sparsity. It's zeroing out the weights that you don't actually use, and it makes the models like significantly smaller. We covered SGLang a little bit. We didn't actually get to the AI Art and Diffusion. I'll just read out those updates as well. Then we covered that OpenAI had new guidelines for upcoming elections, and they're trying to add techniques for folks to identify DALL-E generated images, and they're adding restrictions to how their LLMs are used in the context of voter suppression, etc. We then talked about Deepmind and AlphaGeometry, where Deepmind released and open sourced, looks like, a model called AlphaGeometry that uses neuro-symbolic approach with two models that solves geometry at almost a gold medal at the Olympiad level, so geometry Olympiads, and quite impressive, this release from Deepmind, and shout out. It was trained on 100 million synthetic dataset sources, sourced from like more than 1 billion or so random examples, and it's quite impressive, so shout out Deepmind as well. We also briefly mentioned Samsung that has Samsung S24, their flagship phone that now Apple is needed to compete with, that has AI everywhere, uses the new Qualcomm chip, and has AI in pretty much summarization. Everywhere there's like a button with the sparkles with AI. And one cool thing that we haven't mentioned, but I saw MKBHD on Twitter review, is that they added real-time translation of calls. So you can literally call some people with a different language, and on-device translation after you download the model on device will actually be able to translate this in real time. So you can read what the other person said in different language, but also hear it. And that's like quite cool. Then we had a deep interview with Maxime, the author of many things. Recently, we've talked about Fixtral, the mixture of experts of the Phi models. We've talked about merges. Maxime had a great explanation on his blog and then on the Hugging Face blog about what merges, what MergeKit does, and how that plays into the whole ecosystem. The top LLM leaderboard now has been taken over by merges, specifically likely because merging models does not require additional compute or additional training, and that's fairly easy to do with just the code. Merges takes and combines with using different algorithms like Slurp and other algorithms. It combines different models and different weights from different models, including potentially building models of novel sizes. So we've seen 10 billion parameter models, like 120 billion parameters. So you can use those techniques to combine models or merge models into different ways. There's also Frankenmerge that uses different models to combine into one. So we dove into that and what's the inspiration for merging and what it actually does. Maxime also released like Lazy Merge Kit, which is a thin wrapper on top of the merge kit from Charles Goddard. So shout out to Charles. So we had a very interesting interview about merging, and thank you, Maxime, for joining us. Definitely worth a listen as well. And then we had breaking news from Big Zach and the Meta team that talked about, he gave an update about the number of GPUs that they have. And by the end of this year, they're talking about 350,000 NVIDIA H100s and overall 600,000 H100s or equivalents of compute, which they're going to use for AI and metaverse. And definitely a great update. They're training Llama 3 right now. The stuff that we didn't get to, but I wanted to update, and I will add in show notes, there's a stable diffusion code that runs 100% in the browser with WebGPU and Diffusers.js, a thread from ClipDrop CEO Cyril Diagne. And there's also, we've talked about ThursdAI, the company that releases a bunch of models. They released Diffusion, a text-to-image model with only 732 million parameters. It's twice as fast and 61% cheaper than Stable Diffusion with the same image quality, so that getting improved. But I think they're talking about Stable Diffusion 1.4, so not SDXL or the new one. And ThursdAI also released the Coder, and we also covered the Stable Diffusion Coder, that is a coding model that runs closer on device, a 3 billion parameter model that beats Code Llama 7B. I think that's most of the stuff we talked about. And then one of the major things that Umesh brought, we've talked about corporate drama, maybe a new segment in ThursdAI where Microsoft did some things that actually disrupted workflows and companies' actual products built on top of Microsoft, which is considerably not great and led to a fight. And hopefully not, but potentially a legal battle as well. And that's not something that should be done by a cloud provider such as Microsoft. Very ugly. In addition to this, we also talked about Microsoft announcing the Copilot Pro that's now open for small businesses for $20 a month with no minimum seats as well. And I think that's most of the things that we've mentioned. Let's go. Welcome. everyone. Yet another ThursdAI coming to you from, I guess today is January 18th, mid of January 2024. We all need to get used to saying 2024 at this point. We have a bunch of AI news. My name is Alex Volkov. I'm an AI evangelist with Weights and Biases. And I'm joined on stage here with dear friends, co-hosts of ThursdAI, podcast, newsletter, live X recording, community, I don't know, a bunch of other stuff as well. Nistan does paper readings, is a semi-part of this as well. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I will just say a few things before we get started. So first of all, for those of you who are new, who are listening to this for the first time, first of all, welcome. It's great that you have found us. Please DM me with like how you found this. I would love to know as I'm looking into the channels, etc. However, I will say that we've been here every week, pretty much at the same time. I don't think we've changed time since the summer. So 8:30 a.m. Pacific. And we try to do this every Thursday. I think we missed one or two. I was sick once. Apologies. But other than that, we're here to talk about AI every week. And what happens often is as we talk about things, different breaking news happen and folks announce different stuff on Thursdays. And we cover pretty much a very broad spectrum in AI changes. So I know there's like spaces to talk about diffusion, specifically art spaces as well. So we cover diffusion to an extent, but we try to focus on, I guess our main focus is open source, LLMs. We love those. We have a bunch of folks here on stage. They're training and fine-tuning the greatest kind of open source models, and definitely follow up on the different, how should I say, different techniques like the merging stuff that we're going to talk to at length later. And we hopefully get to hear about them first before they take over Hugging Face, which was the case, I think, with some of the models and some of the techniques. And I see two more folks joining us as well from different areas of the open source community. So I will say welcome LDJ and welcome Alignment. I'll say LDJ, you've been missing in action. I was just saying, how are you, man? Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Awesome.
Glad to be back.
Yeah. And also we have Austin, aka Alignment Lab. What's up, Austin?
Oh, dude, I'm great. I was actually just on a call with LDJ and he was like, oh, ThursdAI is starting. And I was like, let's go.
Yeah, that's exactly what I like to hear. That the calendar event is popping up and ThursdAI is starting. So with that, I think it's time for the open source stuff. Open source AI, let's get it started. All right, so welcome to probably the biggest, the most fun, the most contentful section of ThursdAI, where we talk about open source LLMs and LMMs. I guess we should also start mentioning, because a bunch of these models that we see are also multimodal. And I guess we'll start with Nous Hermes fine-tune on Mixtral. We've been waiting for this. Mixtral was released, I want to say a month or so ago, a month and a half ago. And now we're getting one of the top kind of data sets and fine-tunes trained on Mixtral. And we're getting this in multiple formats. Again, shout out Technium. If you guys don't follow Technium yet, what are you even doing showing up on ThursdAI? Definitely give Technium a follow. But Mixtral fine-tune is available, and it comes in two variants, an SFT and an DPO, and SFT only. So SFT is a supervised fine-tuning, and DPO, direct preference optimization. This is like not a new technique, but definitely has been around for a while. Many people are using DPOs at this point. We've talked about DPO multiple times. I think we also saw, Nistan, correct me if I'm wrong, the actual Mixtral instruct is also DPO, right? We saw this in the paper. So DPO is everywhere. And this is not the first time that SFT and DPO pairs getting released separately. I think we've chatted with John Durbin, who's, shout out John, is in the audience. And that conversation is on the feed. So definitely check out the conversation with John. And the Bagel models were also released separately with SFT and the DPO version as well. And I think John back then mentioned that each one has different things it's good at. And I also would love to figure out which one of the Nous Hermes Mixtral fine-tunes is best at what. Technium has a bunch of stuff in that thread, so I'll link this below for examples. And I will say that the comparisons to Mixtral Instruct, Technium posted a bunch of comparisons to Mixtral Instruct, and it's interesting that not all of the benchmarks look like on improvements. There's a few, I think, on GPT-4All and HelloSwag, the base model at least the non-DPO based model, it still wins just by a little bit, but everything else like ARCs and AGI, eval, and MMLU are significant improvements. And we're going to probably continue to see those improvements. Shout out. If you have tried it, please let me know. I will say this last thing, that finally after setting up LM Studio, again, shout out to LM Studio, we'll get to chat with LM Studio at one point, hopefully soon. I am now, the first thing I do is download these models because it's super, super easy, both with LM Studio and Llama. And there was a tiny, I think, quantization thing in the beginning, and now there isn't, and now it works great. And these models, I've loaded them up on my Mac before a flight, and I was just able to chat with this AI with no internet connection or like poorly internet connection. It was really something. I know we've talked about this multiple times. Hey, put this on a thumb drive and then have all of human knowledge, quote unquote. I'm not really saying it's all of human knowledge, but I've been actually able to do this before my flight, and it was really cool. And I think the last thing that to mention here is that Technium suggests to make liberal use of system prompts. So all of Hermes models, there's now a bunch of Hermes models flying around. Definitely the most, at least famous one is Hermes, I think 7B, but also the E version. And this seems to beat the E version as far as our friend Wolfram Raven from Local Llama tested. This is probably the best Nous model out of them all so far. Obviously, it's based on the best open source model called Mixtral, and definitely liberal use of system prompts. Yeah, roleplay is suggested, setting expectations, specifications, and everything else you can think of. Very easy to do with LM Studio. I haven't dove into like actually how to steer these models for exactly the task that I do. Luigi, LDJ, you said that you want to tell me how to use LM Studio in regards on this. So I would love to hear from you. First of all, have you had a chance to try these models specifically? And second of all, let's talk about system prompts in LM Studio a little bit, because I think it's a part that people are definitely missing.
Yeah, a lot of the latest models like Hermes and I think maybe Dolphin 2 trained with system prompts. So if you really want to get the best use out of it, definitely use that. And it's just same thing with ChatGPT, really, where give instructions of how you maybe want to have it respond to you, or maybe add in a few threats of what you would do to the AI if it does not respond correctly. And surprisingly, that seems to actually sometimes give good results. I personally try to always say please and thank you, but yeah. And there's also prefix and suffixes, which I think I talked to you about, Alex.
You briefly mentioned this, but maybe worth like giving a little bit of a heads up for folks.
Yeah, I think it really is worth maybe just like sit down and just a video with me and you actually going through it, because
sure,
it's a decent amount to go through. But yeah, on the model card of most models, if you just look at something called prefix or suffix that is usually described in the model card, then you apply that to the LM Studio settings on the right panel in the chat settings. And yeah, you just make sure you have those things right. If you don't, there's a good chance you're not actually using the model correctly, and it's not going to give you the best result.
And they differ from the base model as well. Like we've seen, like different base models have different things that you want to add there, and you may getting like the same performance, but getting underperformed a little bit. I'll also say for folks who are using Mac, the Silicon, Apple Silicon, there's a little hidden checkbox there that I don't know if it's by default already. It's called Use Apple Metal, and definitely make sure that's on for you. Significant improvement in performance and inference. So I think Neural Hermes, anything else on folks here on stage that want to talk about this model and how it was trained and the difference in DPO? Folks, feel free to chime in.
The cool thing about DPO is it's such a reinforcement learning technique. I don't know if anyone else has had a chance to read the paper about it, but essentially what occurred was that some researchers found that that transformers already have a baked in optimal reward function. And so what DPO is really doing is just training the model on that reward function, just biasing it towards the selected like good example. When you give it the good and bad example pairs, not directly unique to this model, but it is super interesting because it really opens up a whole bunch of possibilities with what you can do with the model. That you can give it negative examples and get more performance for it.
The DPO is ranking different outputs in terms of like preference. So can you talk about the pairs stuff? Everybody says DPO pairs. Like what do they mean by pairs? Could you say this about this?
So instead of training on, like typically what you do is you would build your data set, and that would be like your good data set. And you'd have a weaker model than the one that you use to synthesize the data set, or just bad examples of responses for every single example in the data set. So if you have one that's like, how do I make a cup of tea? And then instructions about how to make a cup of tea, then you'd also have that paired with a negative example of a response to how do I make a cup of tea? And then the response is something else like how to build a Lego house or whatever. And when you go to actually train it, you show it both at once and you tell it which one is the positive and which one's a negative, and you just bias it towards positive. It's quite similar conceptually to the way that OpenChat does the CRLFT training, although OpenChat actually has a specific token for the good and bad examples that it has weighted. But functionally, the idea is the same. You're just doing reinforcement learning, which lets you take data where you may have bad examples in there, and rather than having to remove them and waste data, you can now make a good example and get more out of it than you would have been by just replacing it. So it lets you recoup extra performance out of bad data.
Thanks for the explanation. And definitely we've seen, at least in my again plays with the bigger model and the DPO version of Nous, Hermes, Mixtral, this feels like the DPO at least behaves a little bit. I actually don't know to attribute this to the technique or to the
really
data sets, but it's really good.
Yeah, we've noticed if we do a regular supervised fine tune first, like just normal fine tuning, and then we DPO over that, the models push just much further than either thing alone too. I don't know if that's unilaterally true because we do a fairly specific kind of model when we make these big releases, but it seems, at least for the case of just general reasoning skill, it helps a lot.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I guess the downside of this, not the downside, but the outcome of some of this is that folks who want to just use a model and are trying to maybe tune into ThursdAI to know which model is good to use, or maybe they're reading the local llama stuff. There's now so many choices, including so many configurations. So maybe we should do like a recap and also a simplification. LDJs for like system messages and the prefixes, alignment with DPO versus SFT. Just simplify and say, hey folks, use this, because right now there's so many. You can choose between quantization methods. There's at least 4 or 5 different ones for you to choose from. And LM Studio says on a few of them, use this is recommended, but it says recommended for five different ones. There's different quantization providers as well, right? So the block is obviously the most familiar one. There's now a choice between DPO or SFT or DPO plus SFT. And we haven't even begun to talk about merges, which is coming as well. So there's a lot of choice, and we need to simplify this for folks. So definitely, just to simplify, the Hermes models are usually very well behaved and great for roleplay as well. Try them out. If you have the room to run Mixtral for your stuff, Mixtral is definitely by far the best open source models that we have. Go ahead, Lyman.
Yeah, so Mixtral that model is, the architecture is very similar to a really old, comparatively old architecture that's been tried and true before. And so because of that, there's a lot of efficiencies that we just haven't integrated into the modern stack, but that will come. And there's a bunch of new ones that people have been making. And between the new quantization methods that you can do with Mixtral, because since it's sparse MOE, it doesn't actually need all of its weights as much as each other. So some of them are like less important. It lets you quantize those quite a lot without actually hurting the model's performance very much. And you can also offload these layers when they're not being used. And then you can do like expert pre-caching where you predict some experts ahead of time, which lets you get faster inference speed. And at the end of the day, if the sort of quick sharp, which is this like 2-bit quantization method, continues to prove out that it's as performant as it claims, we could end up running Mixtral on 4 gigs of VRAM on a laptop.
And
we will. We just needed to perform a bit better.
So I guess this takes us to the next. Oh, go ahead, Nista, and then it's going to take us to the next optimization stuff.
We could definitely have it run on 4 gigs. Like I've had it a little above 4. However, but the point is to have it run well. And the quantization, it still makes it a little bit unfit for anything other than very short conversations.
And we'll get it there.
All right. So in this point,
we'll have Mixtral under 4 gigs very soon, and it will be good. Yes.
And that's a promise. That's a promise. So what happens is once you go and put those bigger models on slower hardware, which is possible, you then wait painfully a long time for inference to actually happen. But this takes us to the next thing from the folks from LMSys they released a fast and expressive LLM inference with radix attention and SGLang. So folks from LMSys, if you guys remember from models like Vicuna, that took Llama and trained it on additional datasets. And LMSys Arena and all these places, like we definitely trust them, at least with some of the evaluation stuff. I think, is MMLU also LMSys's area, or at least they test on MMLU. They released a inference optimization kind of collection of techniques. I don't think it's one specifically technique because there's like radix attention. Yeah, go ahead.
It's where all this was going in the first place, between all these sort of different prompting programming frameworks and inference engines. What they've done is they built out the back end with the end goal of having an extremely controllable, steerable compiling system for programming outputs from like an AI in the way, like with Pydantic, or in the way that you would typically use sort of structured grammars and sampling techniques, and way more. It's hard to explain in summary in a way that's very easily grokkable without getting too technical, but it's a combination of many things that we've been doing individually, which were always going to be one big thing. They just saw it first and did it first. And now when you're looking at it, it seems very obvious that this is probably how things should look going forward.
So let's actually talk about what they have. Yeah, they propose like different co-designing the backend runtime and the front-end language, which is, like Alignment said, a structured domain-specific language embedded in Python to control the inference generation process. It's called domain-specific language, DSLs, and I think many folks have been using some of this. I think DSPYs as well from Omar Khattab is being like mentioned in the same breath. And then this language like executed in the interpreter code or in compiler code. And on the backend, they have this radix attention technique for automatic and efficient KV cache reuse. I don't know if that's like necessarily like MOE specific or not yet, but definitely the combination of those two plus the code that they've released shows just incredible results. Like, folks, we live in the age, and we've talked about multiple of those techniques. We live in the age where somebody like this can come up and say, hey, here's an example of a set of techniques that if you use them, you get 5x improvement on inference. In the same breath, they were saying, hey, we're going to take Mixtral and put it in 4 gigabytes. And we've seen this, obviously, with Stable Diffusion, which we're going to mention that runs fully in the browser. We're now seeing releases like this from a very reputable place, a collection of techniques that have been used to some extent by some folks, and now all under one roof, under one like GitHub thing that actually improves the inference by 5x on all of the major evaluations, at least that they've tested, that we always talk about. So 5x on MMLU, and HelloSwag is significantly more performant, React Agent, React, like all these things, quite impressive. One thing that I would definitely want to shout out is that the maintainer of Lava, the LMM, the kind of the visual Llama is definitely also replied and said that the execution of Llama is actually of Lava is actually written in the report itself, and it improves Lava execution by 5x as well. And by execution, I mean like inference speed, basically. So without going like too much into radix attention, because honestly, it's way too heavy for the space, it's quite incredible that we get stuff like this from like places like LMSys, specifically in the area of running smaller models, running bigger models on smaller hardware. Go ahead, Nissan.
I'll say something. So it does automate a lot of the tricks that people have been pulling, and it works great for large amounts of smaller prompts. Once you go to longer prompts, the benefit is not that much compared to VLLM. I think it felt like 5 or 10% faster when it came to VLLM. So again, I haven't taken a very deep dive into it. Just want to just make people aware that yeah, it's fantastic for smaller prompts and stuff. But for longer ones, you don't necessarily need to switch your whole stack to it. VLLM still works fine.
Yeah, I think if you're doing like what you would normally be doing with VLLM, which is like processing like large amounts of data or serving for just general purposes, probably there's no need to switch your stack. I think for specifically what it feels optimized for is agent frameworks in which you have many models communicating short strings back to each other, one model wearing many hats. And the optimizations, just while we're on the topic, is crazy right now. There's still 3 papers with major inference optimizations for Mixtral alone, as well as for VLLM, and that seem to compose with everything pretty well. And having an alternative to VLLM that's similarly performant is huge because VLLM is a big bottleneck on a lot of stacks because of the way that it handles attention off on the CPU. It feels a lot like when Llama CPP got like offloading the same week that speculative decoding came out with Hugging-based transformers, and everything just got 100 times faster, like a half a year ago or so.
Yeah. I would also, it definitely felt like that day when LMSys released the SGLang optimization that we're just now talking about. I don't have a link for this, but also Elias released from IST Austria, released Marlin, which is a I think the way I know it's cool is that Tim Dittmers from QLore retweeted this and said, this is a huge step forward. And Tim Dittmers is the guy in CUDA mode, the codes, CUDA kernels within like a night or something, planning for 3 months and then finishing. So I know that Tim Dittmers, when he says something is a huge deal, he probably knows what's up. So Marlin released the same day that like this SGLang released, and it's a linear kernel for LLM inference with near ideal 4x speed up to batch sizes of 16 to 32 tokens. And they came out pretty much the same day yesterday on January 17th. So I'm going to add this in the show notes. So Marlin is also like an exciting optimization. And Austin, I fully agree with you where we see these breakthroughs or collections of methods that suddenly are finally collected in the same way. A bunch of papers that haven't released code as well or haven't played with different things. And it's very exciting to see them keep coming out. We're only at the beginning of this year. And I think to the second point that you just mentioned with agent frameworks, specifically RAG, retrieval augmented generation, this benefit is significant. Like you said, because the short strings back and forth, this agent communicate with each other. Last week, we've talked with one such author from Crew AI. Crew specifically is an orchestration of different agents that do different tasks and coordinate and talk to each other and improving inference there. Many of them run on GPT-4. And I haven't fully gotten into how to do this yet, but SGLang also say that their like LLM programming can actually work with various backends. So OpenAI as well, Anthropic and Gemini and local models. That's very interesting if they actually improve OpenAI inference in Python. But DSPY RAG, so a RAG on DSPYs from Omar Khattab is definitely mentioned in the SGLang report. I know I'm throwing like a lot of acronyms on you guys. So SGLang is the stuff we talk about as the new language from LMSys org that speeds up some stuff. DSPY we haven't talked about yet, so we'll cover. But one of the tasks on DSPY's RAG, so retrieval, is mentioned that it gets like a significant boost. Like Nissen and Austin said, not necessarily for longer context prompts. If you shove like 30,000 tokens for summarization, maybe this technique that caches a bunch of stuff between calls is not going to be super helpful, but for fast execution of multiple things is definitely significant effects. And like I think Lyman said, it's only the beginning of optimization cycles that we see, and it's quite exciting to see them come out. I think we've covered 2 optimization techniques, SGLang and then Marlin as well. I'll put a link to the show notes as well. And I think now it's time to move to... Yeah, one thing that we're going to chat about is neural magic. And I definitely, folks on stage, feel free to talk about neural magic because I saw somebody told me it's cool, but I have no idea how to even simplify this. So if you want, Austin, you want to take the lead on this one, definitely feel free.
Yeah, okay. Neural magic. This is actually the first conversation I think that me and LDJ both geeked out really hard on. We were talking because we were both the only people the other person who even knew about this company. Neural magic has been making miracles in the corner for years. I first got interested in them because they had made a BERT model that was initially, it was nearly like, I think, a gig on your computer to run and spoke English perfectly well and all this other stuff. And they had compressed it to the point that the full model completely on your computer was like 15 megabytes. And what blew my mind was like, how does that even know English? And it was at like 96% the original accuracy, despite all of that. They specialize in these like optimization and compression techniques. And so what they do typically is they have a stack, which they wrote a paper about a while ago, which I'll post in the comments here. It's called Overt Surgeon, which is basically a process in which they have a teacher model and a student model. And the student model, they use distillation in the more traditional sense that I think it's more commonly used now, where you're just training on a model's output. And they use the actual logits they basically load both models in during the training run and train the smaller model to behave like the larger model. And while they're doing that, they're also pruning it, which is essentially you reduce the the weights that are not getting used during training to 0, which lets your computer like not have to calculate them. So it moves much faster. And then they also quantize, which is where you reduce the accuracy. Basically, without getting too technical, you're literally summarizing the parameters of the model such that it's literally a smaller file. And they do this all at once, which takes the larger model and compresses it into the student model that's starting out smaller. And then they're quantizing the student model and pruning it. So it's both running faster and literally getting smaller. And they can, as far as I'm aware, there's nobody who's even coming close as far as being able to compress a model so much. And recently, I think about 2 months ago, we first saw that they're integrating transformers with Sparsify Alpha, which is now just out, and it's called Sparsify on the GitHub. Totally check it out. You can make a tiny llama and do all that stuff to it and make it microscopic. It's amazing. And
so questions here, Austin,
yeah.
just real quick. So we've been talking about quantization for folks who are like not following the space like super closely. Let's say there's different quantization techniques and some of them create like smaller files, but the performance or like the accuracy is getting lowered. How is sparsification different from quantization, at least on the basic level? Are they compatible? Will they be used? Could you use both of them on the same file?
Yeah.
What is this thing, sparsification?
So in reality, probably if it were like more accessible of a tool, we would all likely just be doing both every single training run. But since there's always new quantization techniques, it doesn't make sense to it. But with sparsification, the specific difference is rather than taking the same model and reducing the accuracy of the calculations by making it smaller, the model's staying the same size physically on your drive, but you're reducing the weights that aren't getting used to a 0 value. And what that does is just means your GPU just has to do less calculations for the model to do inference, and it makes it just much faster.
All right.
Also, we, for the next baklava version, Neural Magic did make a clip model for us. So a shout out to them. They were able to cut down the size by about 4 times smaller. So we'll have that out soon. And yeah, also for anybody else that wants to learn about sparsity, just look up Nir Shavit on YouTube, Nirshavit. He's the MIT professor that pioneered sparsity and has a lot of videos out, and Neural Magic is his company. And yeah, it's looking really promising in the future because they can optimize at a deep level for CPU inference. And it's not necessarily just quantization, it's also they are reducing the amount of unused weights. So yeah, I expect to see a lot more stuff about sparsity from the GPU poor side of the spectrum because so the benefits are yet to be reaped.
Oh.
Anyway, shout out to Neural Magic as well.
Shout out to Nir Shavit and Neural Magic. It looks cool, and they just got into sparsifying fine-tuned models as well. I think they sparsified some Nous models, and I don't know if they got to open chat yet, but I think some folks are waiting for Phi sparsification. Definitely the area of smaller models running with smaller hardware is advancing super, super fast. Let's move on, folks, because we've been in open source area for quite a while, and then we also need to get to the end of our conversations here and start doing deep dives. So Star Coder was released from Stability. A brief review here is a 3 billion parameter language model from Stability AI. It does code completion and obviously runs offline because it's a small model and you can run it. They claim it can run on MacBook Airs as well. And they say something like without GPU. Interesting. Accurate completion across 18 languages at level comparable to models twice the size. Here's a Code Llama. Interesting comparison to Code Llama at this point, because we've seen a bunch of other models already beat, I think, Code Llama on different metrics, but people still compare themselves to the big dog. And it's very interesting. They used the multi-stage process, pre-training in natural language and fine-tuning on code datasets to improve programming language performance. And it supports fill in the middle and expanded context sizes compared to previous versions of Stable Coder. And I think, Stable Diffusion now has like a commercial membership plan because everybody's thinking about, okay, how is Stable going to make money? So they have this membership where you can use their models. So it's not like fully open source. I think you can use these models commercially if you participate in this membership. Otherwise, you can use them for research. So Stable Coder, check it out. I think it's new on Hugging Face, I think, from today. I believe. And I think the last thing that I want to chat about in open source just briefly is Neural Beagle 7B from Maxime, who's in the audience and is going to come up hopefully in the interview in a few minutes. I want to say maybe 20 minutes, Maxime. Neural Beagle, back when I added this to my notes, was the top performing 7 billion parameter fine-tune in open source LLM leaderboard. It's no longer the top performing, but it's definitely number 4 at least. And it's a merge plus a DPO. That's what I saw from Maxime. A merge of, actually interesting what it's a merge of. So let's go into the model card and check this out. But Maxime looks like have a bunch of models. And Neural Beagle, the Neural Beagle 14, 7 billion parameters has an average of 60 on all the scores. 46 on AGI eval, and yeah, it's one of the top performing models, and it's a merge of different things, and it already has a demo space that I'll link in the show notes as well. Yeah, it uses Lazy Merge Kit, which is a collab that Maxime also, we're going to chat about and figure out what this means, what this merging thing means. But definitely, I think that this model triggered one of the Nathans in AI that says, hey, I wanted to ignore this merge business for a while, but I guess I can't anymore, because merges is not to be ignored at this point. And this is a merge of the Una Beagle and the distilled Marcoro slurp, so which is also a merge. So if you guys hear me and you're like confused, like what are all these things mean, hopefully we'll be able to clarify this with Maxime. Maxime also had a tweet where there's now a collab where you can take a model like this and basically map out the genealogy of these models, what is based on what, and it's quite cool to see. And what else should I say about this model? I think that's pretty much it. It's very performative. I actually haven't had the chance to use this, but it's right up there, and it's a merge model. There's the checkbox, like we said, in the Open LLM leaderboards. If you don't want, for some reason, to see the merge models and you'll see like more trained models, you will uncheck that. But definitely the merge models are competing for the top of the LLM leaderboards right now. Haven't seen a lot of them on the LMSys arena. So it's going to be interesting to see how they treat the merge models. And I think that's most on open source, and we've given this corner almost 40 minutes, so I think it's time to move on a little bit here, folks. So I don't have breaking news here, so I'll just do this. A small transition so I can take a breath. All right, we're moving towards the big companies, LLMs and APIs, and I think the biggest player in this whole area right now, or like one of the biggest, we've been waiting for them, and they gave us some stuff, is Deepmind. Deepmind released a Nature article, which they always do. They always publish in Nature. This time the link to Nature article didn't really work, but hopefully they fixed it by now. And they released AlphaGeometry. So they released like a bunch of stuff. AlphaFold, if you remember, AlphaGo, AlphaZero. They had a model that self-trains to play anything, not only chess or not only Go. And now they've released AlphaGeometry that solves geometry at almost a gold medal level at the Olympiad level. So they have this, how should I say, this nice chart that says the previous state of the art on this Olympiad gold medalist standard gotten to 10 problems solved. There's like time limits. I'm not sure what the time limits actually are. I don't have it in my notes, but you have to solve these like very like difficult geometry levels. Folks compete for the gold medals in this Olympiad. And the AlphaGeometry now comes very close to the gold medalist standard. So the gold medalist answers 25.9 problems solved, and AlphaGeometry now answers 25. And they claim that the previous state of the art answered 10, just 10. So they more than doubled, and they're getting close to the Olympiad. I think I saw like a tweet from Nat Friedman or somebody that says they would offer a $1 million prize for somebody who solves the Geometry Olympiad at the gold medal, and now we're getting there. They use a neurosymbolic approach, and they combine LLM with a symbolic deduction engine to leverage the strength of both, which some folks compare to thinking fast and slow, where you have system 1, system 2 thinking, or at least the outline of system 1, system 2 thinking. In this case, this does actually help. They have the neurosymbolic approach. I think they use the neurosymbolic approach. I don't think I've seen this before. And I think the most interesting parts is it was trained on over 100 million synthetic geometry examples generated from 1 billion random diagrams. Completely, solely synthetic geometry examples. This whole data set for training of this model that beats humans at geometry, which was like previously very difficult, is fully synthetic. And I think that's super cool. And we only begun this year, but definitely this is going to be the year where full synthetic data sets are going to rule. And yeah, opinions, folks, here on stage. Have you read about this? What's interesting to you? I would love to hear folks kind of chime in on this as well, because I think it's like super cool, and kudos for them to releasing this. Also, I saw somebody said, I think Bindu said that they released this open source, but I haven't seen anything. Definitely Luigi, go, and then Nistan.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up Nat Friedman having that bet up, because I remember that too. And now I'm thinking, I wonder if she'd be willing to give up like the $1 million or whatever the money is to Deepmind, because this was done by Google Deepmind. So that'd be funny.
How has Google not discovered AGI yet and fallen so behind? This almost feels like an internal illness or something. Something is going on, because yeah.
I don't think that Google needs to compete is the thing. I just don't think they're incentivized to release anything into the space, because they don't have to. There's really not anything here except money to lose for them. They already have all the data and stuff.
Yeah, and back to the geometry problems. I can't wait to test this if they release it, as to how it does when given really random, very long numbers. If it still solves the problem, then that will be extremely impressive. And yeah, I've done those math Olympiads with geometry questions, and they're not easy at all. You have to picture stuff in 3D and 4D and whatever in your head. They're very tricky problems. So yeah, this is pretty huge. That's all.
Quite huge, and kudos on them. Umesh, I think you actually found the source, right?
Yeah. So there is GitHub repo on Google Deepmind. So if you go to Google-Deepmind on GitHub and then AlphaGeometry, you can find the code repo for that. So listen, if you want to test it out, it's there for you. So
I just want to hark on this just like for a little bit. Did Google release code for us finally? Did Google like open source something? Welcome back, Google.
Yeah, so this is like first release kind of thing coming out of Google. So it's going to be, yeah, it is quite interesting.
Definitely moves us towards like more generalist agents.
I'll have it up in a sec.
Yeah, listen, please put this, and we'll add this to the show notes as well. Definitely the question, how have they not solved AGI yet? Solving math at the Olympiad level seems like moving us forward. Definitely this neurosymbolic approach where they combine language models with the symbolic deduction engine, which I have no idea what symbolic deduction means in this case, but leveraging strength of both, this seems like going towards the right path. We've seen, I think, similar things with vision as well, where you combine kind of vision heads and into one model they can understand. I don't think this model is multimodal at all. Doesn't look like, but maybe I'm wrong here. And I think, yeah, the solutions for this thing is verifiable by machines. I saw this one tweet that will go down in history. Somebody said, computers has always been good for calculations. I don't understand the big deal there here. And I think it's really funny to like keep this tweet behind the scenes. All right, so shout out to Deepmind for this fairly incredible release. Hopefully some of the techniques they used will be then used by folks in other areas as well to get us AIs that are significantly better at geometry and different things. Oh yeah, Umesh, just before we continue, you want to talk about this neurosymbolic thing? Because we've talked about this. I think Daniel Jeffries talked about this last time. We talked about Rabbit. If you guys remember, this was at the end of the last space. We've talked about Rabbit AM, large action model. And Umesh, you just mentioned something that they also use neurosymbolic to an extent, right?
Yeah, so the LAM, large action model, basically based on neurosymbolic programming for when they are talking about training the model from the actions that you're going to perform, is basically they are encoding neurosymbolic programming to train the model or capture the actions, basically. So that's what, in theory, they are saying. We have to see what comes out in practice.
Yeah, and based at least on their examples, it looks like very compelling and potentially like being able to solve a bunch of stuff or like to remember based on your actions. So neurosymbolic, not a new approach. I apologize. I will edit this. Definitely Rabbit said this, you're right. And hopefully we'll get to see this LAM thing. So back to OpenAI, as elections are happening right now and everybody was fearing like, hey, what's going to happen with deepfakes, etc. OpenAI released their guidelines toward election as they prepare for elections. Obviously, they're aware that they're happening. And I think the few interesting things there, that they're taking steps to prevent their tools like DALL-E and ChatGPT from being abused. I don't know we have open source, so I don't know if folks will go to the GPT-4s to generate, let's say, propaganda. But DALL-E, for example, starts to integrate some cryptography to their images, which is very interesting. Cryptography solutions, which again, in case you download the actual file and then send it, could be a thing. But I don't know if somebody takes a screenshot of a DALL-E generation, if that will apply at all. There are definitely usage policies for stuff like ChatGPT enforcing limits on political campaigning, impersonating candidates, and discouraging voting. And then they want to run ahead of what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and all these things. They want to get ahead of this, which it makes sense. So the technology they use to detect images were generated by DALL-E. I haven't seen any release on them that says, hey, we'll build a tool for you to actually identify if those are generated images or not. It's going to be interesting because like with LLM writing, all of these tools that you use to dump AI text in there, they all can be obscured with another LLM. I don't know if it's a futile attempt, but definitely a worthwhile one. And at least in the basic UI, I think blocking some attempts of destabilizing democracy, I think it's a good idea. And I think that's mostly it. I think there's one different mention that somehow silently they removed where a terms and conditions thing where their outputs is not to be used for war or weapon developing. And I think they removed that. And I think they're also signed something with Department of Defense. But I think that's all for OpenAI. And then I wanted to mention about Microsoft, and Umesh, definitely feel free to chime in here as well, because that underlines the benefit for open source. But quickly, Microsoft announced Copilot. We've talked about Copilot, the previously Bing Chat, Copilot everywhere. So they've announced different paid plans for Copilot Pro, $20 a month premium, and then it does enhanced image creation, which I think we don't even get in DALL-E by default. And it's now generally available for small businesses with no user minimum. So if you guys remember, we've talked about Copilot before, where Microsoft announced it for large enterprises. It integrates into Microsoft 365 everywhere. And now the Copilots are also open for smaller businesses. And soon there's going to be this Copilot Studio to build custom GPTs. Very cool for small businesses. We'll see how much actually folks will use this. And there's also some Microsoft saga that they've changed some stuff in their pipeline. So Umesh, you mentioned this in the beginning. We'd love to hear from you. What's been going on as you guys are big Azure users through Microsoft?
Yeah, so basically it happened day before yesterday. Actually, we got a call from one of our clients, which is one of a very big financial institution. And we have a deterministic pipeline, which was constructed using Azure Studio, in fact. And we work together with very core Microsoft team actually to make sure that it is properly deterministic, because there are some legal implications and everything. And then the tool started failing, and because we had some function calling, which would actually go into the knowledge base of company. And that function calling was getting triggered using what we call the deterministic intent from users' prompts, basically. And that entire function calling was failing. Now, we carried out all types of work and everything. It was very frantic because it was a front-end tool, and it started having some impact. And it was working for 6 months. So it worked without any problems for 6 months, and suddenly it just stops working. And the reason was that there were 2 words that were in the definition of the tool. So that definition of tool was actually informing the pipeline what the tool is all about, and that's how the tool was getting invoked. And those 2 words basically were getting flagged into the OpenAI API. So we basically Azure OpenAI API, not OpenAI's direct API. We are routing it through Azure, and it's a separate instance of GPT-4, and there are separate guidelines. They mimic some of the guidelines that are there in OpenAI, but Microsoft has its own guidelines. And they change the guidelines without actually informing the clients. And that basically triggered. Yeah, so we literally had legal people and literally had fight. Oh, it was an open fight, literally, with Microsoft. If you were in that room, you would have seen it was really bad. And then eventually there were talks about cases and stuff like that. And eventually, basically, actually, this company is actually modifying the contract with Microsoft, where Microsoft will be liable to inform the company before they change any kind of guidelines. And you know what happened after that is the beauty, because in the beginning of my startup, beginning of the year, we implemented some solutions where we have a direct contract with Microsoft, and we have implemented solution on the backing of those contracts. So in last 2 days, actually, I've gone back to those clients with whom we have implemented solutions so that they have a direct contract with Microsoft, because we don't want to be a party involved as far as the SLAs are concerned, because this is very dangerous if you are developing solutions for people, and if the core solution through which you are driving the entire application pipeline is getting changed without any kind of data contract backing, so to say. Yeah, this is a great learning for us. And I've been always a proponent of open source solutions. And I think this has given one more kind of a booster to us because now we can go back to the new clients and say, hey guys, if possible, if we give you the kind of solution that you're looking for, then let's go to open source solution rather than going for a closed source solution. So,
and this is like a huge,
in summary.
Yeah, a huge like reason why, right? Getting, it's very interesting. Like in this area we mentioned, definitely feel free to chime in on this a little bit more. The outputs of LLMs are usually non-deterministic. And so this has to be built into understanding when you build tools on top of this. But this is not that. This is them adding not like a different model or something like a different that you can switch. They're adding something in between or some like policy thing without announcing this to the customers. And supposedly if you go to Azure instead of OpenAI, for example, you would go for the most stability, as underlined by the fact that when OpenAI had downtime after Dev Day, Microsoft Azure GPT-4 like endpoints, they were all fine. They were all green, right? So supposedly you would go for the stability and kind of the corporate backing. There's also like different ISO things and HIPAA compliances, like all these things that Microsoft Azure like proposes on top of OpenAI. But here we have a case where like underlines how important open models that you host yourself are, even if you host them like maybe on Azure as well, because then nobody can change the moderation endpoints for you and suddenly decide that a few words in your prompt are not to be used anymore.
Yeah, but Alex, this had nothing to do with the prompt, actually. It was actually the definition of the function that was there. And the key is, like, I would draw an analogy to what you call the data contracts. I don't know how many people are aware of data contracts, but when you have ownership of data within a very large organization, let's say 20,000, 30,000 people up, you have data contracts where the data originates from a particular source and some other division is using that data. So you have a contract between those two. And that data contract details the data definitions which are there. And the contract signed, the signatory of the contract is responsible to ensure that if they change any kind of data structure or data definition, then the receiver of the data or the client of the data contract is supposed to be informed. That is a part of your data contract. And that's how these large organizations function. And what we need is that kind of a framework where you have a data contract with the service provider. So even if you're going with an open source solution, and if your open source solution is hosted by someone, then you need to have that kind of a contract in place. So it's not just that open source solution is a solution for everything. It's about the person who is providing the inference. So if you are controlling the inference, then you're secure because you are not going to make the changes without understanding the repercussions of those changes. But if you are, let's say, hosting open source model on Amazon Bedrock, for example, and if they have a system prompt that lies in front of your prompt that goes to the model, then you have to make sure that Amazon adheres to their responsibility in terms of giving you the required inference.
Absolutely. Thanks for giving us. First of all, like it sucks that it happens, and hopefully now Microsoft, like you said, they changed their approach here. Nistan, go ahead if you want to follow up.
Yeah. So for us, this has been amazing. I already have clients lining up to pay for the baklava API. So I'll just say that first before it's even out. However, it is extremely unfortunate for those that build, let's say, apps in a hospital or for a therapist, because now those kinds of applications just had a moderation engine added, and they added apparently for their safety. And now whoever was relying on these applications, now they just stop working out of nowhere. And this is an extremely immature thing to do. This is something you expect from like a random startup with kids, not from freaking Microsoft. And it is pretty worrisome that this safety hysteria has gotten to the point where you're literally just breaking medical applications in production without notifying people. Like that's just, you lost the people's trust now. You're not going to gain that back for a couple of years. And I hope they realize and don't do this again. Like, don't break production and make changes to people in prod that are relying on this for like SOC 2, or as in the case of UMass that have signed service level agreements. Because now those people lose all their money if they don't provide the service. And it's really bad. That's all I have to say. It's pretty bad.
Yep, very bad look for Microsoft. Even I think I remember, like, not entirely similar thing, but for OpenAI, when they talked about sunsetting some models, and there was like a developer outcry that said, "Hey, like we use those, we haven't had time to change how we work with different prompts, etc., for the newer models." And so OpenAI actually went back and said, "Hey, we heard you, and we're going to deprecate. Deprecation is going to be pre-announced in advance. It's going to be way longer." Mesh, let's go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. I think you have raised a very valid point, Alex, there. I think all the models that they actually put out of service, they actually should make them open source. I think that's the best solution.
Nah, I wish this was the case. We're still waiting for potentially like open source GPT 2.5. We haven't seen any open sources from OpenAI for a while, besides like some GitHub code. I agree with you. There should be a way for folks to keep doing the same exact thing they're doing. I don't know. In my example, I use Whisper. No matter like what their API releases, what it's like, what they deem inappropriate to translate, the Whisper that I use is hosted, and it will be the same version until I decide basically and test everything. All right, folks, we're moving forward. I think just quickly, there's not a lot of stuff in the vision area. I will mention briefly. We've been here for more than an hour, so I'll definitely like recap the space a little bit. If you're joining, let me just play the music and I'll recap, and then we'll get into the interview. So with hour 15, you're listening to ThursdAI. Those of you who just joined us, welcome. If you haven't been here before, this is a weekly space all about AI, open source. As our friend of the pod, Jan, just tweeted out, everybody in LLM space and open source is in here, and very great to see. We've covered open source stuff. We've covered corporate drama right now, and then we're moving on to an interview. And then we're going to talk about AI, art, and diffusion if we're going to have time at the end of this. There's a brief mention that I want to say, but basically, let me just reintroduce myself. My name is Alex Volkov. I'm an AI evangelist with Weights and Biases. And we have a small segment here for Weights and Biases that I want to just bring. I just came back a few days ago from San Francisco hackathon that we help sponsor with Together AI and LangChain. It was a pretty cool hackathon. It was very brief, like a few hours with AGI House. But basically the theme was RAG versus fine-tune. And I think the theme was versus, and I just promised I'll bring some learnings from this. So there's a bunch of projects that did different things. They used Together's endpoint for fine-tune. So if you can fine-tune on your models and your GPUs, that's one thing. But for many of the AI engineers, that's very difficult to do. So there's a bunch of startups. Together's one that they offer like very simple fine-tuning. I'll definitely add my link to the show notes to the presentation I gave there, which talks about how easy it is to fine-tune using their endpoints. And the folks that won the hackathon, some folks won different prizes, basically used both RAG and fine-tune. And it looks like also there was a paper released afterwards from some folks trying to identify what's better. Is it just doing RAG on top of fine-tuned models or just doing basic RAG? And I don't think we have a clear answer yet. Definitely this hackathon wasn't the end-all of all answers. However, it does look like doing RAG on top of a fine-tuned model improves just a little bit on top of just basic RAG. And it looks like RAG wins on top of just a regular fine-tune for information retrieval tasks as well. So definitely do not skip RAG. And I think from the open source perspective, which we love here on ThursdAI, getting more RAG kind of related models is definitely going to happen. I think we saw some from John Durbin. I think I saw Technium. You mentioned something about like function calling datasets are coming to from Nous as well. So definitely that area is still to be explored, but it looks like the combination of fine-tune and RAG wins just a little bit on top of just basic RAG. I think this is the outcome of that hackathon. Next week in this corner of 1B is going to be an interview with Jason. Stay tuned for that. I think now we have, and many folks have been DMing me because right now we have breaking news. Breaking news actually happening right now. AI breaking news coming at you only on ThursdAI. You know I love to use the sound. You know I love to use the sound, everyone. We have some updates from Big Zuck. I don't know if you guys seen this because it's over on Threads, and I don't know how many of us are on Threads. I definitely know that I barely go there. We have some updates from Big Zuck, specifically around training Llama 3. There's he updates about the long-term vision. I think the summary there is they have an insane amount of GPUs this year. So literally he says at the end of this year, we'll have around 350,000 NVIDIA H100s. So I'm going to repeat this slowly for the people in the back. 350,000 NVIDIA H100s and overall 600,000 H100s or equivalents of compute if you include other GPUs. You remember those hats that people wear, like GPU poor, GPU rich hats? I think Zach can stack the GPU rich hats one on top of the other, and it still won't be enough because 600,000 H100 compute is just ridiculous. And he talks about two major parts of their vision. AI and metaverse are connected. I love how it was, and then suddenly AI started being a thing, and now they're connected. I definitely am expecting AI to exist in some form of virtual /world, etc. But definitely he talks about Llama 3, and Llama 3 is coming. They're currently training it per Big Zuck. We know that's coming, or we at least expected this, but I think now is more of a confirmation, and I'm very excited about Llama 3. I will just mention that it's not been a year since Llama 1 yet. So we're January 18th. I think Llama was released on around February 12th, 13th or so, and it's not it hasn't been a year yet, and here we are training the third model on top of Llama. We've had just an incredible amount of innovation on top of it. So definitely expecting, and we're obviously going to cover this as much as possible. So this is, I think, most of it. Oh, and this last thing that he added, Zach has added, and I think it's adding to ThursdAI as well, where we have to start talking about hardware, is that he says, I think lots of people will talk to AIs frequently through the day using smart glasses like what we're building with Ray-Ban Meta. And I think we've talked about their smart glasses, that they're multimodal glasses. They have a camera built in them. You can press a button and actually pass the image into the LLM. They're making improvements in speed as well. I will say just an additional one thing. We've talked how Meta is adding a bunch of AI into every chat and nobody necessarily used them. Recently, a friend of mine, maybe because I'm an AI evangelist, so he felt free to do this in our chats. He just added an AI bot to our chat. Literally just my DM with a friend who knows nothing about AI, it's not part of his world. He does something else. Recently, he's hey, let me add this thing. So Meta is definitely letting folks experiment with AI more than some other places, and he just added an AI to our chat. It was super cool. So here's an update from Zach. Big Zach, Llama 3 is training, and then they have a lot of GPUs. They're super GPU rich, and hopefully we'll get the benefit. Go ahead, Nissan.
That's literally, $17 billion worth of H100s? Yeah, they're going to need that if they're going to have visual stuff from people's glasses. But it's an insane amount. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just ran some quick calculations. I got roughly similar numbers to what Nissan just said. And if I'm doing my math, I'm running just some numbers based off the alleged GPT-4 leaks of amount of GPU hours that it might take. Let's say if they used all those meta GPUs to do a GPT-4 level model, I'm getting numbers. It would take less than a week pretty much to train. Yeah, this is an insane amount of GPUs for people that don't have good references for this. Yeah,
I think insane enough to maybe open a new category on top of GPU rich. It's just quite incredible. And hopefully they're committed to the open source of this in Llama 3. Umesh, you had a comment as well?
Yeah. What if Llama 3 is going to be multimodal? Then they will need those GPUs.
I'm really hoping it will. They're training the models, multimodality is something they talked about. It's time to move towards the LMM world and multimodality, and they will need all those GPUs to crank out the vision part of this. Hopefully multimodal in other areas. A reminder, Meta has released a bunch of attempts at multimodality in other areas, not only image, IMU motion units, and they've talked about fMRI signals. They've talked about incredible stuff, but definitely other modality like sounds, audio, Live video would be super cool. Like I think this year is the year of live video. So hopefully not only vision. And if it's vision, then hopefully it's like a live video. All right, folks, we're coming up on 2 hours. And with that, I think this is the summary of today's ThursdAI. Thank you everyone for joining. If you haven't subscribed yet, definitely feel free to subscribe at ThursdAI.news. I appreciate everyone's time and attention here. Thank you so much for the co-hosts and guests for today's pod, and shout out everyone. And I have to end this on the very happy note of the alchemy thing, because the one thing that came out from the conversation with Maxime, who merges, and Nistin and everything, is that a lot of this is alchemy, and a lot of this is like trying to see how things work when you combine and not continue train models. They still perform better. So I have to end this very happy tune, which will represent the alchemy that we're all doing, and we love it. Thank you everyone for joining this ThursdAI, and we'll see you next week. Cheers. And we'll add this banger to the show notes as well. Bye everyone.